Hello and welcome. I am Ashok Rajguru, your instructor, and in this presentation we shall be taking up one topic for review from homeopathic philosophy. Today's topic is relating to the primary and secondary action of drugs. This is one topic that was very well understood by Hahnemann when he did his first experiments with the cinchona bark. And this is a very fundamental concept which is extremely important to selection of remedies and the whole concept of homeopathic cure. So let's take a closer look at what homeopathic philosophy has to say. The objectives of this presentation are to understand the action of medicinal substances on vital force. This is a very important concept because it forms the foundation of homeopathic therapeutics, and the whole concept of similia similibus curantur derives from a very clear understanding of the action that medicinal substances have on the vital force. Broadly, it has got two actions. There is a primary action followed by a secondary action. We shall be illustrating and understanding this with examples. And also we'll be taking a look at what modern pharmacological research findings have to tell us. This will tell us how symptoms can be altered by drugs, because the patients who come to us will be presenting symptoms which will be either induced by the drugs or medicines which they are already taking, or they could be symptoms peculiar and particular to the disease, and they will also be presenting symptoms which belong to their temperament and to their constitution. These three things are very important to us before we start analyzing those symptoms and synthesizing our analysis to find a remedy for their condition. Now, Hahnemann, through his own personal research and meticulous study, back in 1842, which is about 175 years ago, has documented this, and what I am going to show you are aphorisms from the 6th edition of the Organon. Aphorism 59 is a summary of why palliative drugs fail, because most of them act on the principle of contraries. Aphorism 63 deals with the initial action, which means what is the action of a particular substance on the life force. For instance, if you are chopping onion, your eyes will start watering. So that is the initial action. For every initial action or primary action, the life force is going to strive and spring back into action in order to oppose this initial action. This is something very important for us to know. Aphorism 64 goes further to tell us that the initial action, when it happens, that means when you take a drug or a medicinal substance, the life force is actually a passive witness to that, and it allows the primary action to take place. It's only after the primary action has occurred that the counteraction of opposing to the initial action or the life force will try to drive that out by striving for superiority. Aphorisms 66 and 67 tell us that the homeopathic cure employs the initial action of the drug to elicit the secondary. In other words, the curative action of the life force can happen only if the patient is given a drug which creates a condition or symptoms which are similar to the disease which the person is suffering. The life force then acts against or tries to strive for superiority over this particular condition, and that in turn helps to drive the disease out of the economy of the patient. We must understand this very clearly, because in what follows in this particular presentation, you will realize that Hahnemann had spelt out pharmacodynamics very clearly back in 1842, which is almost 175 years ago. I will illustrate this with the example of one very commonly used drug, and which is also pertinent to the case that is presented in this lesson. All of you must have seen this or probably used it at some time or the other. It's a very common nasal spray which is used for decongestion, or it is in simple language known as a nasal decongestant. It is prepared from a pharmaceutical substance known as xylometazoline. Now, what they have found is that the long-term use of this results in rhinitis medicamentosa. Now, what exactly does the word medicamentosa mean? It simply means that the initial condition for which the drug was being taken will rebound. It will come back with a vengeance. And the longer that a patient has been taking, or in the greater quantity that the patient has been taking, the worse the symptoms will be. It will really come back with a vengeance depending upon the extent and duration of usage. So the rebound swelling that happens in the nasal mucosa and venous structure is going to be proportional to the period, frequency, and the amount that the drug has been used. You can find more on this on a paper that has been published by these two researchers, Graf and Juto, and this was published back in 1995 in Rhinology, a professional journal. Now, here is another information published by the American Journal of Medicine in the year 2012 in the month of January. It says that some medications that usually lower the blood pressure may paradoxically increase blood pressure. Now, of course, for the modern pharmacologist or the allopath, this might be a paradox, but to a homeopath who has even done a cursory reading of the organon will understand that this is really the play of the initial and secondary action of a drug substance. So it's quite easy to understand that in the light of the homeopathic philosophy, why some medications that usually lower blood pressure may paradoxically increase blood pressure. There's no paradox here at all, in fact. An increase in blood pressure may be encountered after their discontinuation. So in other words, the life force may continue to act in such a way as to increase the blood pressure even after the drug use has been aborted or stopped. Further, the American Journal of Medicine says that in general, drug-induced blood pressure increases are small and transient. However, it cautions that severe hypertension, which can even involve a stroke or irreversible kidney damage, can happen. So this is quite a big admission on the part of the pharmacologist, but a very important one when we try to understand the principle laid out in the aphorisms that I mentioned earlier. Now, I would like to introduce you to a very useful and informative website which summarizes the side effects of nearly most of the drugs that are in common use. It's a German website called CIDR, Side Effect Resource. It's known as a side effect resource. Now, what exactly it does is that it contains 62,069 drug side effects. That's a very large number indeed. It covers a total of 888, almost 900 drugs, and there are almost 1,450 distinct side effects. It says that altogether 70% of the drugs have between 10 to 100 different side effects. The important point that is mentioned on this website is that drugs can have off targets in other tissues. In other words, if a person is taking a particular drug which is supposed to be targeted at one tissue or organ, can have effect on other similar tissues in other organs. And that the main targets themselves can be expressed in different tissues or have effects on other tissues. This is something that is quite easily understood by the homeopath. For example, Bryonia. Bryonia alba has a particular affinity for the serous membrane and for connective tissue. This particular serous membrane could be in the joints. I'm talking about the serous and synovial membranes. They can not be just limited to joints. They could affect similar tissues which surround the heart, the pericardium, or which surround the lungs, which is the pleura. So this is something that is quite clearly understood by homeopaths in their choice of remedies. So this is the website I mentioned. It's sideeffects.embl.de. It's a German website. Once again, Molecular Systems Biology, another professional medical journal, has published in 2010 that the side effect of drugs are an important source of human phenotypic information, or how a person responds to a particular drug is quite unique, and that is determined by the phenotypic information, or what we call in our homeopathic parlance as constitution. We have constitutional remedies, and allopathy is only waking up now to this particular concept, which has been around with us for the past 175 years or more. In fact, it has been there since the time of Paracelsus and Aristotle. Now, it also says that similarity has been found to be predictive of common drug targets. In simple language, as we mentioned earlier, bryonia can be useful not only for joint pains of the extremities like knees and elbows, it can also affect pleura and pericardium. Let us take a very interesting example. Beta blockers are drugs that are used as cardiovascular drugs, and they target something known as the alpha adrenergic receptors. Now these receptors happen to reside in the vascular tissue all over the body, and they use this in order to lower blood pressure because they happen to do vasodilation. However, the same kind of a tissue also exists in the penis, and because of that they act on those receptors which reside in the tissue or the organ in the penis, causing erectile dysfunction. That's a very interesting finding. So the real side effect of beta blockers, which lead to loss of libido and erectile dysfunction, is because of this particular peculiarity of this drug. In other words, the therapeutic action can affect areas outside the intended areas, something that is already known to homeopaths for a very, very long time. Now I'll show you Stanford Medicine News Center's communication dated 25th of May 2011. What they found was indeed very revealing and quite startling, that combination of two very common medications may cause unexpected increase in blood glucose levels. In fact, they can lead to disastrous consequences in people who are suffering from diabetes. In a study, they found that a very commonly used antidepressant, which is marketed as Paxil, and another cholesterol lowering medication, also very commonly prescribed and called Pravachol, can have a very disastrous effect on the health of a person who is a diabetic. However, if these drugs are taken alone, they do not exhibit this particular effect. And it concludes the report by saying that it is not uncommon for medications to have effects together that they don't display alone. So this also is a reminder to all the homeopaths why one should not indulge in polypharmacy. Because when the provings are done, they are done essentially with one single potentized remedy. If you are giving your patient more than one remedy at the same time, you are going to end up in the same situation which has been described by the Stanford Medical News Center communication of 25th May, which we just discussed. So does it mean that allopaths are really waking up to the findings of homeopathy? Indeed, it does seem so, because now they are talking about precision medicine or personalized medicine. They are encouraging doctors to take into account the differences of people, but they are concentrating more on genetics and the environmental effects on genes and lifestyles. Their system will involve laboratory tests to decipher your genome. At the same time, they tell us that it is really an extension of their traditional approach to understanding and treating illness, as something which has been around, as we mentioned, since the time of Aristotle, and which was also mentioned by Paracelsus, and which was put to practical use only after Hahnemann founded homeopathy. Now, what does all this mean to us? What do I take home from this particular presentation? Well, as we mentioned earlier, presenting symptoms may be drug induced. In case one of your patients is presenting symptoms and is on certain drugs, go to this particular website, which I mentioned earlier, and check out what are the common side effects of the drugs that are being taken by that person. For example, the chemical substance known as buzolene, and marketed as Metrelief or Sinafact or Superfact, it's a common prescription for women for endometriosis or uterine fibroids, and also to men for prostate conditions. Now, if I were to go and check this on the website, I come to know that it causes a loss of libido in 75 to 85% of the cases. People suffer from erectile dysfunction in 75 to 80% of the cases. Women can get hot flushes between 38.5 to 72%. Menorrhagia could also be induced in almost one woman out of four. Headaches also seem to be quite common, between 16.5% to more than 28%. Acne has also been reported between 5 and 32%. Vaginal dryness between 7% and 28%. So these are indications which must be taken into account, because if you are going to take these symptoms, you must understand that these symptoms are essentially the effect of drugs, and they do not belong to the disease, nor do they belong to the patient. So I'll round up this presentation with a brief summary. We saw what is meant by the terms primary and secondary action of drugs, what the new research has to say, and how it supports our homeopathic understanding. Also, it is being now accepted in allopathic circles what that constitution can have an impact on the response of a patient to a given medicine. We also looked at certain examples of side effects and how they impact on presenting symptoms. So that's all for this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and please participate in the forum and put up your questions and any points of discussion that you wish to raise. So once again, thank you very much, and bye-bye.